Welcome to the International Student Podcast by Prodigy Finance. My name is Cyndi. I'm a community specialist here at Prodigy Finance. And today we have a very special guest. We have Harvi join us. Harvi is actually a colleague of mine. So usually we have mentors and Prodigy alumni join the podcast. But in this episode, we have my colleague Harvi. Welcome, Harvi. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Wonderful to be here with you today, Cyndi.
So can you tell us a little bit about yourself, Harvi? What do you do at Prodigy Finance?
Sure. So I head up new business at Prodigy Finance, and me and my team essentially have two core functions. One is to enter new markets where Prodigy doesn't currently fund loans. So previously we opened up the Australian market. We're currently looking at UAE and also Ireland as new destinations. And then the second thing that me and my team do is to create funding relationships with universities that we don't currently have relationships with, and also work with them to promote Prodigy to inbound students. And the key markets that we work in are outside of the US, so UK, EU, Australia, Canada, and anywhere else, really outside of the United States.
Oh, that's such an important role. And at Prodigy, I know we're always looking to expand and to open new markets and to help more international students. So, Harvi, you're here today to talk to us about living expenses. Can you tell us a little bit more about what living expenses mean?
Definitely. So outside of the United States, at the moment, Prodigy Finance has a international tuition loan for postgraduate students, which is fantastic. But it kind of does what it says on the tin. It is literally a tuition loan. There are only a few schools in the UK where we can also support students with the cost of living expenses, cost of attendance. And so there is a big gap in terms of loan size for students who are especially going to the UK. As you know, as I know, and everyone else knows, since the pandemic, cost of living has skyrocketed, inflation has gone up in a big way. And so students struggle with these additional costs that are associated with study. I was actually looking at a survey from last year, which had some pretty dim stats around living expenses. So 70% of students are now turning to high interest rate credit cards to fund their living expenses. And furthermore, like 1/3 of students in the UK anyway, have approached universities for crisis loans. So there is a massive need for somebody to come in and help with living expenses for students. So essentially what it is a loan to cover things like accommodation, food, and all the other expenses that students have outside of tuition and studying at university.
So how is this different to what Prodigy Finance offers? I thought Prodigy Finance offers living expenses in their loans.
Yeah, so I think that is probably a bit of a misconception from students. Certainly, as I say, in the United States, we can support living expenses and tuition. So we kind of always done that in the United States, but outside of the States, because we don't have a disbursement partner. Like in the United States, we have a partner who actually helps us disperse the loans directly to the universities. We don't have that in the other markets. And so we're unable to actually support students with the living expense element. We can only support them with the tuition loan, which is paid directly to universities. This will be the first time where Prodigy is actually able to support students with the living expense loan, which is paid directly to the student, rather than the university.
How exciting. And who qualifies for living expenses now?
Yeah. So as I say, we do support living expenses in the US and historically always have. But in an exciting turn of events, now we've launched this for the UK market. So any student who is going to one of the supported schools in the UK where living expenses is supported, which is the vast proportion of the schools, they will be eligible to apply for a living expense loan as well as their tuition loan.
And how would they know if they qualify for living expenses or not? So if they, admitted to a school in the UK and they are completing an application on the Prodigy Finance website, how would they know that they qualify for living expenses?
It's a good question. So it will actually appear on the provisional offer page. So when the student goes to make an application, they will be told whether or not they can apply for the tuition and the living expense element of the loan. So it's very transparent when the student actually comes onto the platform, makes an application, whether or not they are eligible to apply for both the tuition and the living expense element.
Okay. And if what if the school is not willing to accept living expenses? Are there schools that are still not willing to accept living expenses? Or is it all schools in the UK that we now support living expenses?
Yeah, so it will be all schools in the UK. There are a small handful of schools left where we had historic relationships with, where they still do support living expenses, but the way that we disperse them differs slightly to this route. So the bog standard across the UK for almost all schools will be that the tuition is paid directly to the university and the living expenses paid directly to the student. But there are about 3 or 4 schools with historic relationships, such as Cambridge, Oxford, London School of Economics, and there may be 1 or 2 other ones, where we still disperse the living expenses directly to the university, and the university will take those away from the total loan and then send those to the student. So from a student's perspective, it works exactly the same way. They still get access to the living expenses. It's just we disperse it in a slightly different way. But in totality, all UK schools will be eligible for living expense loans.
Wow, this is so exciting for international students wanting to study in the UK. Before, we only supported their tuition, and now we're supporting their full cost of attendance.
Totally. And it's like I said, like some of those statistics I spoke about earlier with regards to the surveys done by Experian and NASMA, like that's one thing. But living expenses and the maintenance costs of study are actually a requisite of UK VI. So our visa offices, all students have to show that they have the maintenance funds. So they will now be able to use Prodigy Finance as evidence of that.
So this is some exciting news for international students wanting to study in the UK. Well, for students going to schools in the UK, will their loan confirmation letter now be updated to include funds being reserved for living expenses?
Yeah, absolutely. Another good question. And yeah, you're quite right. So the loan confirmation letter now, or loan sanctions letter as it's known in India and some of our other markets, it will be split down by what we're supporting in terms of tuition and then what we're supporting in terms of living costs. And that is very useful for 2 reasons. One is during the student journey, when a student is going through the admissions process with the university, they have to get something called a CAS, which is just confirmation of admissions from the university, which they then use to go and get their visa. And during that CAS process, predominantly universities will ask the student how they're funding both tuition and also those maintenance costs before they will then give them that CAS for the visa office appointment. So this loan confirmation letter update will help with getting that CAS because you can show the university where your maintenance funds are also coming from. And then when you go for your visa, you can then use that as the evidence to UKVI that you both have the maintenance costs and the tuition costs covered by Prodigy Finance.
What a great relief for students wanting to study in the UK, because now they've got funds for living expenses that they don't need to stress about or try to, gather from family or friends. And now they have a higher chance of visa approval and of approval to get admitted into that school.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a big difference as we saw internally last year and like over the last few years. One of the key blockers of students going through and actually converting into like funded students has always been the loan size, and one of the main issues has been the fact that we don't cover living expenses. So being able to cover these additional expenses for students really helps them. We should see more and more students now going through and actually being able to enroll onto their dream courses because we're able to fund more of the cost of study.
So earlier on, you mentioned the funds get paid directly to the school or directly to the student. So typically, funds get paid directly to the school, even if it includes living expenses. But earlier on, you mentioned that funds get paid directly to the student. How does that work?
Yeah. So, well, so in the UK, we've only been able to fund living expenses if the school was able to accept those funds, and they would then transfer them to the student. And for compliance reasons, most universities wouldn't do that. And so we were kind of left in this position where actually only a handful of schools who we had very close relationships would do that. So now what we're able to do is actually disperse these funds directly to a UK bank account for the student. And so that kind of cuts out that need for the school in order to fund these costs, these loans directly to the student. So yeah, we're funding these living expense loans direct to the student rather than the school, which has allowed us to undertake this broader cross UK university project.
So when do they get those funds then? Do they get it before the tuition is paid to the school? Because if it gets paid into a UK bank account, I guess you obviously have to be in your country of studies in order to open up a bank account in the UK. And then is that when the funds or the living expenses gets paid?
Yeah, absolutely. So it is. We've set the date, so it's 1 month after the first tuition disbursement date, and
Okay.
the
So
reason.
1 month after Prodigy disperses the funds, living expenses gets paid to the student.
Yeah. So there are a couple of things the student needs to do. As you rightfully said, the student needs to open a UK bank account, and that will take some time once they actually land in the UK. So there needs to be a slight gap between them landing in the UK and us dispersing the tuition loan, which will allow them to enroll on the course, and then the first disbursement for the living expense loan. So 1 month is a pretty good gap for them to then go and open their bank account, us to verify it on our side, which we do through a third party called Played. And once we've verified that account and we've linked it to on the Prodigy side, we'll then disperse that loan. So 1 month after the tuition disbursement. Then what we're doing at the moment is 3 disbursements of the living expense loan. So the other 2 payments will be in 2-month intervals after that first living expense payment.
Wow. So is there any other preparation that the student has to do other than having to open up a UK bank account? Is there anything else a student needs to prepare for?
There's only one other thing the student needs to do. So once they've opened their bank account and it's verified and linked on our side, the only other thing that needs to happen is confirmation of enrollment. So we typically do that on our side via a system called JISC, which is used across the UK. But the student may have to do something on their side, like get a confirmation of enrollment letter, upload that if we can't do it on our side automatically. But those are the only 2 things the student has to do once they've kind of gone through and signed their loan agreement as they would for their tuition loan.
Okay. So it's just kind of to confirm that they are admitted to that school and that course.
Yeah. So it's a little bit more than that. So typically with the tuition loan, we would just need their admission letter and then that's it. We don't need anything else from them. We just disperse the loan. With that is obviously risk free. So if the student, for whatever reason, doesn't decide to go to the school or they have any sort of issue with travel, then the school would just refund that money straight back to us, and we can then wipe that off their loan. With living expenses, because we're dispersing our direct student, we need to know that they are actually in the UK and they are actually studying, which is why we need that confirmation of enrollment. So it's a little bit different to our tuition process, where all we need is the admissions letter. Here we actually need to know that they have gone to the country, they are enrolled on the course, and they are actually studying before we then make the first disbursement directly to the student.
Makes sense. So Prodigy Finance disperses loans in USD. And of course, if you are going to school in the UK, you need pounds, right? How does that work? And does the student then incur any conversion costs as a result of receiving funds in USD?
Sure. Yeah, another good question. So like with tuition, it works very much the same way with living expenses. So the loan agreement with the student is in USD. However, the disbursement is in GBP directly to the student's bank account. Just
Okay.
the same way tuition works, where the loan contract is in USD, but we send the funds to the school in GBP. There is a conversion, obviously currency conversion that happens, but it's done very close to when the student signs the loan agreement. So the conversion should be fairly accurate of like that date. So it shouldn't cost the student anything more, the same way as it wouldn't when we do the conversions for tuition.
Okay. Okay. That makes sense. And you mentioned earlier on the funds get sent a month kind of after tuition gets sent. So, typically what can these funds then be used for, the living expenses? Because I suppose you can't really use it for flight tickets because you have to be in the UK. Is there any kind of parameters around what the funds can be used for?
Yeah, definitely. So typically it will be used for like accommodation costs, general maintenance costs while the student is studying on campus. So all sorts of things, to be honest, like book materials, food, and just general maintenance costs that the student will have while in country. So if students want to get an idea, for example, of what like typical maintenance costs are in the UK, can actually go to the university's website and it lists it all out, how much they should budget for things like food, accommodation, and just general living expenses in that city per month. So like you can actually get a pretty good idea as a student of what you need to budget and how much you need to take as a maintenance loan or a living expense loan from Prodigy based on those budgets.
Okay, awesome. So all of those resources are available to the student via the university, just to kind of give you estimation of what those funds typically should be used for. And it's generally the upkeep of the student while they're busy studying.
Yeah. And like some of those costs could even be some entertainment costs. Like, so yeah, like I said, I think if students want to find out more about what they should budget for, like definitely go on your school's website because they're all listed on there. And KVI gives an indication of what the costs are, which is how we've actually worked these costs out. So like outside of London, I think it's roughly £1,000 a month that a student needs to budget for. And then inside the London area, I think it's around about £1,200 a month that a student needs to budget for living expenses.
Great. So I know you said that this benefit will be expanded to all schools in the UK. Is it not the situation right now? Are there only a few select schools that benefit from receiving living expenses?
So no, actually, the vast proportion of schools at the moment actually are now eligible for living expenses. There may be just a few that we're working on in the background, but generally speaking, it's almost all of them. Certainly in the next few weeks, we'll have all schools up and running for living expenses. It's just a process of internally onboarding all the courses to make sure that they're they have the living expense element for students to apply for. So within the next few weeks, should be pretty much the whole portfolio of UK schools that are eligible.
Great. So in the next couple of weeks, all schools in the UK will be eligible for living expenses.
Yeah.
Wow, that's so exciting. I mean, being a community specialist, I receive a lot of questions from students going to the UK asking, why is my living expenses not supported? Why is it only students going to schools in the US that get living expenses? But this is some really exciting news. Thank you, Harvey.
From our perspective, Cyndi, sorry, I was
Yeah,
just going to say, like, we go to conferences all the time. So we're talking to schools, and schools forever, especially in the UK, have asked us to support living expenses. It's just because of their compliance procedures, weren't able to actually kind of do it through themselves. So they needed us to do this project where we directly disperse it to students. So it's massive for the school. And also, just like you, we have students that are always asking us, like, when are you going to do living expenses? So it's really exciting, actually, for
it
everyone.
really is. I think it's just making it so much more easier for students to go and study at schools in the UK.
Definitely.
So some big news. What about, like, does a student need to go and tell their school anything if, like, if they're receiving living expenses? Does a student need to tell the school?
Yeah, so it can be useful. So as I mentioned, like during the student journey of admissions into a UK school, at some point, inevitably, they're going to be asked how they're going to cover their maintenance costs by the admissions team. And that document that I mentioned, the CAS, which, like, you can't get to your visa interview without a CAS from your university, because it is, right, you now have confirmation that you're going to be admitted to that one particular university. You do need to evidence how you're going to fund your maintenance costs. So as we kind of spoke about earlier, our loan guarantee letter that shows that amount that we're covering, as well as the tuition, is very useful for the student at that point in order to get their CAS for visa purposes. So yeah, they will have to inevitably at some point in their journey tell somebody in the admissions team how they're covering their maintenance costs.
As an international student, if I don't use all of the living expenses, am I able to return those funds back to Prodigy Finance?
Yeah. So if you're not using all of them, then you can return back to source, and then we would just deduct that from the overall loan total balance. So yeah, that's absolutely fine. Well, there's no early repayment penalties on our loans. So at any point, if you want to overpay or return funds back, then you can do that, and we would reduce the loan balance down.
Great. Harvey, do you just want to give any tips or advice or suggestions to students who are going to study in the UK? Is there anything that you just want to let students studying in the UK know about the benefits of now receiving living expenses?
I think the main benefit, really, in terms of us doing this for students, is we're able to help with a much higher proportion of the total cost of study, which is what students have always asked us to do. So that in itself is a massive bonus. I think the second thing, from my perspective, because I've worked in student finance in the UK, I think a big thing is the fact that our interest rate is a lot lower than other options out there. So, like, first and foremost, students have very limited options, as we know, for covering cost of study. And as far as I'm aware, there aren't too many loans out there that actually can help with living expenses other than the Prodigy one. And when you compare it to things like high interest credit cards, and maybe payday loans, which unfortunately some students are going down, this is an excellent option in terms of just interest rate and cost and things of that nature as well.
Thank you so much, Harvey. So, just in summarizing to all of our viewers and listeners, this is such a big, massive, or this is such a benefit, such a great benefit to international students wanting to go and study in the UK. We are now able to support your living expenses at those schools. We've only ever supported covering up to 100% cost of attendance to schools in the US. And now we are able to cover between 80 to 100% cost of attendance to students wanting to study in the UK. We support lots of schools in the UK. And so, thanks to Harvey and his incredible team for unlocking this benefit. And then also thank you so much, Harvey, for joining us today and just sharing your insights. It's been really valuable. And I know that a lot of students are going to benefit from this feature. So thank you so much for talking to us about living expenses in the UK.
No problem at all. And hopefully we are going to expand this more widely than the UK in not too distant future. So to like EU schools, hopefully Australia and a few other markets. So maybe we could do another podcast then when we're launching it even more globally.
We'll be inviting you for another podcast once you start supporting living expenses in Australia.
Perfect.
Well, thank you so much to all our listeners for joining. If you like this video, don't forget to share it with family and friends. Also, subscribe to our YouTube channel to get up-to-date student tips and advice from the Prodigy Finance community.